Daniel Hale was a man who loved languages more than anything else in the world. He wasn't just interested in the common ones people spoke every day. He wanted to understand the rare ones, the ones that were fading away, the ones that barely existed in old books or scattered carvings on forgotten walls. To him, languages were like living creatures, each one with its own soul, its own rhythm, and its own secrets. It was late summer when Daniel decided to take a trip into the remote mountains of Nevada. He was following a trail of clues from an old research paper about an almost forgotten Native American dialect. The paper mentioned that somewhere in the canyons, deep where few people ventured, there were strange carvings that no one could fully translate. Some believed they were simply old ceremonial markings. Others thought they were fake. But to Daniel, they felt like a mystery calling him. He packed light, a small backpack, his camera, a notebook filled with sketches of symbols he had studied, and a few days' worth of supplies. The heat during the day was intense, but the dry wind and the quiet beauty of the desert filled him with energy. During the first 2 days, he found a few weather-worn carvings on rock walls, but they were incomplete. Still, the style of the markings didn't match any known local tradition. It excited him even more. On the third afternoon, after following a narrow, twisting path between tall red cliffs, Daniel noticed something unusual. A section of the canyon wall looked smoother, almost polished, as if someone had shaped it with tools far more precise than stone chisels. When he moved closer, he saw the markings, long sweeping lines mixed with sharp angles, almost like a dance frozen in stone. The carvings glowed faintly under the sunlight, not with color, but with a strange depth that made them seem alive. He stood there for a long time, studying them. These weren't random scratches. They looked like a written language, but not one, he recognized. It didn't belong to any Native American dialect he knew, and he knew quite a few. His fingers itched to trace the lines, but he hesitated. Somehow it felt wrong to touch them without understanding. Finally, unable to resist, he reached out and ran his fingers lightly over the shapes. That's when he heard it, a soft sound, behind him. Daniel froze. He wasn't expecting anyone else out here. The nearest town was hours away, and this part of the canyon wasn't on any hiking maps. Slowly, he turned around. A woman was standing just a few feet away. She was tall, with long dark hair that seemed to shimmer slightly as it moved in the breeze. Her skin was smooth and pale, but not in a way that looked unhealthy. It almost seemed to reflect the sunlight. Her eyes caught his attention the most. They were silver, like polished metal, and they watched him with an intensity that made him feel both curious and nervous. Her clothing was unlike anything he had ever seen. A single piece of fabric that looked light as mist, yet it clung and shifted as if alive, catching different shades of color when she moved. Daniel's heart pounded. She looked human, but something about her felt different. Not just her appearance, it was the way she stood, the way her eyes seemed to hold entire thoughts without speaking. The woman tilted her head slightly as though she were examining him. Daniel opened his mouth, not sure what to say. For reasons he couldn't explain, his mind flashed to the symbols on the wall. He remembered a short phrase he had been practicing from an old notebook, a guess at how the unknown language might be spoken. It was probably wrong, but something told him to try. The words felt strange in his mouth, their sounds unfamiliar, but he spoke them carefully. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she began to laugh. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was light, almost musical, like she had just heard the best joke in the world. There was warmth in it, and a hint of relief, as if she had been waiting a long time for this moment. Daniel felt both embarrassed and intrigued. He had no idea what she found funny. Maybe he had pronounced something wrong. Maybe he had just said something completely silly without knowing. But her laughter didn't feel like she was making fun of him. It felt like she was happy he had tried. Still smiling, she stepped closer. Her voice was soft when she spoke, but her words were in the same strange language from the carvings. Daniel caught only fragments of meaning. Her tone was curious, almost playful, as if she were asking him where he had learned those words. I'm studying this language, he said slowly, pointing to the wall. Do you understand it? She tilted her head again, then nodded. Daniel's breath caught. She knew it. She actually knew it. A dozen questions raced through his mind. Where had she learned it? Who was she? Why was she here? But his thoughts were interrupted by a realization. If she spoke this language fluently, and it wasn't from Earth, then who or what was she? The woman took another step closer, her silver eyes reflecting the sunlight in tiny sparks. She spoke again, this time slower, and Daniel realized she was trying to teach him the correct pronunciation. He repeated after her, feeling clumsy but strangely excited. Her smile deepened, and for the first time, Daniel saw something else in her expression, something like hope. They stood there for a while, speaking back and forth, his voice awkward and hers graceful, until the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The light turned the canyon walls golden and shadows began to stretch across the ground. Daniel knew he should head back to his camp before dark, but part of him didn't want to leave. Something told him this meeting was only the beginning, and somewhere deep inside, he had the strange feeling that his life had just shifted onto a path he could never turn away from. The air in the canyon felt cooler as the sun sank lower, but Daniel barely noticed. He was focused on the woman in front of him, still amazed that she could speak the same strange language he had been trying to study for months. She seemed perfectly at ease, standing in the fading light, as if she belonged there more than the rocks and the wind. Daniel took a small step closer, careful not to seem too eager. "Do you understand me?" he asked again, his voice slow and unsure. She smiled, then gave a small nod. Her expression carried a hint of amusement, as though she found his cautious way of speaking almost charming. Daniel pointed at himself. "Daniel," he said clearly. Then he placed his hand on his chest again and repeated, "Daniel." The woman's silver eyes seemed to study him for a moment. Then she touched her own chest lightly and spoke a single word in her language. "Serath." The sound of it was soft, but had a subtle strength, like water flowing over stone. Daniel repeated it carefully. "Serath." She nodded again, and this time there was approval in her gaze. For a while they stood exchanging simple words, names for the sun, the sky, the rocks, even the wind. Serath corrected him gently when his pronunciation slipped, and sometimes she would laugh again, not unkindly, but in a way that made him feel he was part of some secret he didn't yet understand. The more they spoke, the more Daniel realized. This was no accident. Serath wasn't just someone who happened to know the language. She seemed deeply connected to it, almost as if she was a living part of the mystery he had been chasing. At one point, Daniel gestured toward the carvings on the canyon wall. "Did you make these?" he asked. Serath glanced at them, then back at him and nodded slowly. But there was something in her expression, something careful, as if she was deciding how much she could reveal. "Why?" Daniel pressed gently. Her gaze drifted toward the darkening sky, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then she stepped closer to the carvings and touched one of the symbols with her fingertips. She spoke a sentence in her language, and though Daniel couldn't translate it fully, he caught a few familiar words: message, waiting, and home. It struck him suddenly. These weren't just decorations or records. They were messages. Messages she had been leaving for someone. "You're waiting for someone?" Daniel asked. Sarath turned back to him, and her eyes softened. She gave a slow nod, then said a word he didn't recognize, but her tone made it sound important. As the shadows grew longer, Daniel noticed how comfortable Sarath seemed in the fading light. She didn't seem worried about the night coming. In fact, she looked almost calmer, now than when the sun had been bright. Daniel, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the chill of the evening. He pulled his light jacket from his backpack, glancing at her as he did. She didn't seem to need one. Her strange clothing shifted in the breeze, but looked no warmer than silk. Finally, she gestured for him to follow. Curious but cautious, Daniel walked beside her as she led him deeper into the canyon, where the walls rose higher and the air grew cooler still. The sky above had turned to a soft violet, and the first stars were beginning to appear. They reached a small clearing surrounded by smooth rock faces. In the center, there was a flat stone surface covered with more carvings, far more detailed than the ones Daniel had seen earlier. Some of the symbols seemed to glow faintly, almost like they were holding on to the last rays of sunlight. Sarath knelt beside the stone and began to trace the lines, speaking in her language as she did. Her voice was low and steady, almost like she was reciting something important. Daniel crouched beside her, listening closely. He caught more familiar words now, things like travel, stars, arrival, and time. His mind raced as he pieced them together. Was she talking about a journey? About someone coming here? When she finished, she looked at him seriously. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said in her language, slowly, so he could catch each word. "You speak my words." Daniel nodded. "A little," he admitted. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not little," she said carefully in English. Her accent was strange, the syllables clipped in an unusual way. But the meaning was clear. Daniel's heart skipped. "You know English?" Sarath tilted her head as though considering the question, then shook it gently. "No, small," she said. She seemed to choose her words with care, like someone handling something. "Delicate. Better. You speak mine." That simple statement made Daniel feel oddly honored, as though she trusted him more than he realized. The night deepened around them, and the stars above shone brighter. Daniel's curiosity burned stronger than ever. Who was Sarath really? How had she come to know this language, and why was she leaving messages in a place where almost no one would ever find them? But before he could ask more, Sarath pointed toward the sky. Her eyes followed a faint streak of light. Just a meteor, Daniel thought at first. But then it seemed to slow, breaking into smaller sparks before vanishing entirely. Sarath's expression shifted to something unreadable. She whispered a single word, and though Daniel didn't know its meaning, he could tell it carried weight. In that moment, he realized something that sent a shiver through him. Sarath wasn't just a traveler from somewhere far away on Earth. She was from much, much farther than that, and the symbols carved in the stone weren't just her way of remembering, they were her way of calling home. Daniel didn't know it yet, but meeting her in that canyon would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The night in the canyon was quiet except for the gentle whisper of the wind passing between the tall cliffs. The stars overhead looked brighter than Daniel had ever seen them, as if they were leaning closer to watch what was about to happen. He sat near the flat stone covered in glowing carvings, his mind turning over everything he had seen and heard since meeting Sarath. She moved slowly along the edge of the clearing, her silver eyes scanning the sky as though she were waiting for something. Daniel watched her, realizing that every movement she made seemed deliberate, like someone who had been trained to stay calm no matter the situation. Finally, she turned toward him and sat down on the opposite side of the stone. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, Daniel felt that she was ready to tell him something important. "Daniel," she began, speaking in her language but slower than before. He caught his name, followed by words he was starting to recognize: listen, truth, and choose. He leaned forward, focusing on each sound, trying to catch as much meaning as possible. Sarath took a deep breath, then pointed at the carvings on the stone. She traced one of the symbols with her finger. My people, she said carefully in English, pausing as if weighing each word. Far from here? Daniel nodded, his pulse quickening. He didn't interrupt. She gestured toward the sky, her hand moving in a slow arc. I came here. Accident. She frowned slightly, as though the memory was unpleasant. Ship. Broken. Cannot go. Daniel's heart beat faster. It was one thing to suspect she was from somewhere beyond Earth, but hearing her confirm it, even in her limited English, sent a rush of disbelief and awe through him. She continued, now switching back to her own language when English wasn't enough. Daniel caught enough to understand that she had been stranded on Earth for many weeks, hiding from humans because she wasn't sure how they would react to her presence. The carvings, she explained, were messages, coordinates, signals, and instructions meant for her people in case they came looking for her. Daniel let the silence settle between them for a moment. The desert air felt sharper now, like the night itself was paying attention. So, you're leaving soon? He asked. Sarath tilted her head, studying him. Soon, she confirmed, but she hesitated, and then said a word in her language that he didn't know. Daniel frowned slightly. But what? Instead of answering right away, Sarath reached into a small pouch that had been hanging at her side. She pulled out a small, smooth object, no larger than a coin, but glowing faintly from within. It wasn't like any metal Daniel had ever seen. It looked alive somehow, shifting in color as she moved it in her palm. She placed it gently on the stone between them. Gift, she said, though her tone made it clear it was more than just something to keep. Daniel leaned forward, fascinated. What is it? Sarath searched for the words. If you want, you come with me. My people. Take you. Daniel stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. Come with you? You mean, leave Earth? She gave a slow nod. Yes. Learn our ways. See stars. Many worlds. Not return. The words sank in like stones dropping into deep water. He tried to imagine it. Stepping onto a ship from another world. Traveling across space, seeing things no human had ever dreamed of. The thought was breathtaking and terrifying. He looked at her closely. She wasn't joking. The offer was real. Why me? He asked, his voice low. Why not someone else? Sarath's gaze softened. You speak. You try. You not afraid to learn. She placed her hand gently over the carvings. My people need voices. You fit. Daniel sat back, running a hand through his hair. The canyon suddenly felt smaller, as if the cliffs were leaning in, listening to his decision. You're saying, if I go, I can never come back? Yes, she said simply. Your Earth. Gone for you. You live new life. The truth of it made his stomach twist. He thought of his parents back home, his friends, his small apartment filled with books and half-finished projects. He thought of the familiar world he had always known, its smells, its sounds, its everyday rhythm. If he left, all of that would be over. But then he thought of the stars above, the strange, glowing, coin-like object on the stone, and the endless worlds Sarath hinted at. How could he turn away from that? She must have sensed his conflict because she added softly, Not decide now. One moonless night. My people come. You say yes or no. No second chance. Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. One moonless night, he repeated. Sarath reached across the stone and closed his fingers gently around the glowing object. Keep, she said. If yes, bring. He felt the warmth of it in his palm, steady and alive, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. For the rest of the night, they spoke in a mix of her language and his, exchanging stories as best they could. She told him fragments of her world, cities that floated in the air, forests that sang when the wind moved through them, rivers made of light instead of water. He told her about his life on Earth, the cities filled with noise and lights, the changing seasons, the books and languages he loved so much. By the time the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls, Daniel knew two things for certain. Sarath's offer was real, and his life would never again be as simple as it had been before he met her. The glowing object felt heavy in his pocket as he began the long walk back to his camp, and every step seemed to echo with the same question over and over. Would he stay on the world he had always known? Or would he take the leap into the unknown stars with the alien woman who had laughed when he first spoke her language? The days after Sarath's offer felt strange for Daniel. Everything in his life seemed the same on the surface, waking up in his tent, cooking simple meals, hiking through the canyons. But in his mind, nothing was the same. Every time he felt the small, glowing object in his pocket, his heart would speed up. It was warm, almost like it was alive, and it reminded him that his time to decide was running out. One moonless night. That's all he had. He tried to imagine both choices. If he stayed on Earth, his life would continue as it always had. He would go back to his research, write papers, maybe even discover new things about human history. But deep down, he knew that no discovery here could compare to what Sarath was offering. Still, leaving meant never seeing his family again, never walking through the streets of his hometown, never hearing the sound of rain against his window. It meant letting go of everything he had known for 34 years. On the second day after their talk, he met Sarath again. She was waiting near the flat stone with the glowing carvings. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, Daniel forgot all about his doubts. They spent hours walking through narrow canyon paths as she taught him more of her language. He could now form simple sentences without stumbling too much. She seemed pleased whenever he got something right, and sometimes she would laugh softly, just like she had the first time they met. In return, Daniel taught her more English. Her pronunciation was unusual, but she learned quickly. She seemed fascinated by Earth words, especially the ones for feelings: hope, fear, trust. She repeated them carefully, almost as if she wanted to store them safely in her memory. By the third day, Daniel noticed something. Sarath wasn't just teaching him her words, she was also showing him her way of seeing the world. When they stopped by a small pool of water, she told him how her people believed that every drop carried a memory of where it had been. When they climbed a tall rock ledge to watch the sunset, she explained how her home sky was never still, always alive with moving colors. He listened to her stories with quiet wonder, trying to picture it all: floating cities, rivers of light, forests that sang. A civilization so different from his own that it felt like something out of a dream. But with every beautiful detail, the decision before him became heavier. On the fourth day, Sarath grew quieter. She no longer spoke about her world as much. Instead, she began to ask him more about Earth. She wanted to know what it felt like to walk through a crowded street, to taste different foods, to hear children laughing in a park. Daniel realized she was collecting these images in her mind, just as he was collecting hers. That evening, as they sat by the carvings, she looked at him seriously. "Soon," she said in English, her voice calm but firm. "One night, no moon, We go, or no? Daniel nodded. I know. She reached out and touched the pocket where he kept the glowing object. If yes, you bring this. If no, you keep. But it sleeps. Sleeps. The way she said it made him think the object would lose its glow forever if he chose not to go. On the 5th day, Daniel went hiking alone, needing time to think. The desert felt different now, less empty, more like it was holding its breath. He thought about his parents, about his friends back home, about his work. He thought about all the places he had never seen on Earth. But then he also thought about the stars. The thought of standing on another world, hearing languages no human had ever spoken, seeing places no map could show, that pulled at him like nothing else. When he returned to the canyon clearing that evening, Serath was waiting. She didn't ask what he had decided. Instead, she handed him a smooth piece of stone with a single symbol carved into it. He didn't know what it meant, but she told him quietly, "This means beginning." They spent that night under the stars, not talking much, just sitting side by side. Daniel noticed she often looked at the sky, her expression calm but thoughtful. He wondered what it must feel like for her, being so far from home, not knowing if she would see it again. The 6th day passed quickly. Serath's mood was lighter that morning, and they spent the day trading stories. She told him about a bird from her home world that could mimic any sound it heard. He told her about his first trip to the ocean as a child. There was laughter, there was silence, and there was an unspoken awareness that their time was almost up. That evening, Serath pointed to the horizon. Tomorrow, moonless night. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. Tomorrow he would have to choose. There would be no more time to think, no more chances to delay. That night, as he lay in his tent, Daniel couldn't sleep. The desert was quiet, but inside his head, his thoughts raced. He imagined walking toward a ship unlike anything he'd ever seen. He imagined watching Earth grow smaller and smaller until it was just a pale blue dot in the darkness. He imagined living among strangers who spoke a language only he could partially understand. He also imagined staying, waking up in his apartment, drinking coffee, going back to his work, living a life that was safe, but perhaps always wondering what might have been. When the first light of dawn crept into the canyon, Daniel rose. The final day before the moonless night had arrived. Serath was already waiting by the carvings. She didn't greet him with words, only a steady, knowing look. The choice was almost here, and both of them understood what it meant. Somewhere, far above, beyond the reach of human eyes, a ship might already be on its way. And tomorrow night, Daniel would either step into the unknown or watch it vanish forever. The moonless night arrived like a silent guest. The desert sky was darker than Daniel had ever seen it, filled with countless stars that looked almost close enough to touch. The air was cool, still, and heavy with expectation. Daniel stood outside, his small tent, the glowing object in his hand. It pulsed gently, its light steady and warm. Every beat of that glow seemed to match the pounding of his own heart. Tonight was the night. He had spent the entire day wandering the canyon, trying to take in every detail, the rough texture of the rocks, the soft whisper of the wind, the smell of dry earth. He told himself that if he left, he wanted to remember what his home world felt like, even the smallest things. As the last traces of daylight faded, Daniel began walking toward the clearing with the carved stone. His steps echoed softly in the stillness. The stars above shone like distant lanterns guiding his way. When he arrived, Serath was already there. She stood by the glowing carvings, her silver eyes reflecting starlight. She didn't smile this time, but her expression was calm, almost solemn. "You come?" she said softly in English. "I came," Daniel replied, his voice low. She looked at the glowing object in his hand. "You... ready?" Daniel hesitated, closing his fingers around it. "I'm not sure if anyone can ever be completely ready for something like this," he admitted. "But I've made my choice." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The desert around them was silent, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the air began to change. A faint vibration trembled through the ground. The carvings on the stone glowed brighter, their light spreading in intricate patterns. Sarath's eyes lifted toward the sky. Daniel followed her gaze. At first he thought it was another shooting star, but this one didn't streak across the sky. It slowed, growing larger, brighter, until it hovered high above the canyon. A soft hum filled the air, deep and steady. The light from above poured down into the clearing, bathing the stone and the two of them in a pale, shimmering glow. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The shape above wasn't like any airplane or helicopter he had ever seen. It was smooth and rounded, with shifting colors that seemed to ripple across its surface like water. Sarath turned to him. "If yes, step forward. If no, stay." The moment had come. Daniel's mind raced. He thought of his parents, who would never know what happened to him. He thought of the streets he'd walked, the friends he'd laughed with, the countless mornings that had begun with a simple cup of coffee. All of it would be gone if he stepped forward. But he also thought of the endless possibilities. The worlds beyond the stars, the languages yet to be learned, the knowledge no human had ever held. He thought of Sarath's laughter the first time he spoke her language, and the way she looked at him like he was more than just another person from Earth. He took a slow breath. His decision was clear. Daniel stepped forward. Sarath's expression softened, and for the first time that night, she smiled. She reached out, touching the glowing object in his hand. The light within it flared, and suddenly the patterns on the carved stone shifted, forming new symbols Daniel didn't recognize. The hum from above grew louder, and a narrow beam of light descended, surrounding them both. The air inside the beam felt warmer, almost weightless. Daniel felt his feet lifting slightly off the ground. He looked around one last time. The canyon walls, the stone carvings, the desert floor. They were all fading into the glow. His chest tightened, but not from fear. It was the ache of leaving, behind everything familiar. Beside him, Sarath watched him closely. "You will see much," she said quietly. "But you will not be alone." Her words brought him a strange comfort. The light around them grew so bright that the world below vanished completely. Daniel felt a gentle pull, like being carried upward by invisible hands. The hum deepened, and for a moment he thought he could hear faint voices, many voices, speaking in Sarath's language from somewhere above. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation changed. The beam of light softened, and Daniel realized they were no longer in the canyon. They stood inside a vast space unlike anything he had imagined. The walls curved upward into a dome that shimmered with shifting colors, like liquid glass. Strange symbols floated in the air, glowing faintly, and gentle streams of light moved across the floor as if alive. Figures began to appear, tall, graceful, and dressed in the same flowing living fabric as Sarath. Their eyes were all shades of silver and gold, and each one studied Daniel with quiet curiosity. Sarath spoke to them in her language, her tone calm but warm. The others listened, then gave small nods. One of them stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Though the gesture was unfamiliar, it carried the same feeling as a welcome. Daniel's heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the overwhelming realization that he had truly stepped into another world. Sareth glanced at him and said in English, "Welcome to your new life." He took a deep breath, looking around at the endless wonders before him. Somewhere far away, Earth still spun quietly in the dark, but for him, it was now a memory. Ahead lay a future filled with unknown stars, languages, and discoveries. And as they began to walk deeper into the glowing halls, Daniel couldn't help but think back to the moment in the canyon when it all began, when the alien woman laughed, because he had spoken her language. That laughter had changed everything.